Okay, Bill Parrish. Welcome to Lamps Lab.
Good to be here, man.
That's what I call this. Lamps Lab. It just was something that sounded good. A little alliteration in there.
Yeah.
So happy to have you. This is like, as you know, we just beginning this or whatever. So we're gonna start like from the beginning of your story, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Just going back. So
how far back you want to go?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. So basically, you were born where?
In Glendale.
Glendale.
Yeah.
Cincinnati,
Ohio.
Glendale.
Yeah.
And what was it like growing up in Glendale?
It was like pretty much any other place that it was. You know, you growing up in Hamilton, it was kind of a similar way in terms of how the community worked, and you know, it was a tight community where everybody shared everything. So we could have been considered country because everybody had gardens, and we played baseball and sports in the field, but then we play in the street. Wherever it was kind of that kind of community, close knit. Church was the center of the community, and so everybody went to church. If you didn't go to church, then you didn't come outside until after 1 o'clock, because that's when the church people came home. So, yeah, it was a really close community.
And going back a little bit, I just missed, but just to let everybody know, you do several different things. From being an artist, author, singer.
Yeah.
And also we'll get into, kind of what you're doing now with Eckstein and all of that stuff. But I did want to mention that.
Okay.
So kind of back to growing up, what were your parents like?
Well, I had strong parents, just like anybody else. Strong dad. My mom was pretty strong too. And we grew up with the discipline of yes ma'am, no sir, kind of that sort of discipline. Respect was really big, so you couldn't, like, I called my brother stupid one time, so I got in trouble for that. But both my parents were really strong on discipline, and so we came up, that was sort of the tradition of the community, strong parents. But then the extended community also had permission to be strong with you. So there was a great foundation there of discipline, and you knew there wasn't gray areas. It was like right and wrong. So I enjoyed that. It was good for me because I think growing up and having that discipline, that pattern set for you, then you kind of knew what the boundaries were. We all kind of understood, what the rules were and what would happen if you didn't play by the rules. Right. So discipline was a big deal. So we got our share of whoopings that we called then, and I didn't get as many because I had a tender behind, so I didn't want to get as many as my brothers did. So yeah, but that was a community. It was my parents. My dad they were both hardworking parents, so. We saw that. My dad had a lot of friends, black and white, so we saw that aspect of, and there was no real difference. They all came to the house. Our home was open, so whoever was there at dinner ate. So if your friends were over, you ask them if they want to eat, and depending on what you had, they would stay, or if they had something better at home, they would pass on it. And same way with us, if we were at their house, it was all of that. It was really the idea of growing up, what you would like for it to be. Your friends were important, playing and creating, exploring in the woods, all that sort of stuff, creating games, climbing trees, stuff like that. Yeah.
What did your parents do, like, for a living?
Well, my dad, he worked for Princeton for a while. He was security for Princeton for probably about 10, almost 15 years. And so that made it a little difficult for me when I was in school because, your dad is not the most popular person at the school. And then when Lincoln Heights merged with Princeton, we had some riots and stuff, so my dad was kind of the heavy with that. And so he had a reputation for being tough, and everybody liked him, though. He was well liked and respected. And then my mom, she worked for Wyoming Bakery. She did, just in customer service and cakes, made cakes and stuff like that. And,
I love that place.
Yeah, so it used to be for your birthday come, you get a Wyoming Bakery cake. So it was, it was really one of the perks of it. And then before I left the city, I used to go by there all the time in the mornings, to just see Mom. But then, she always had some of those smiley face cookies or something. She'd slip you something to hold you over at lunchtime or whatever. And but yeah, it was hardworking people. That's all. And there was a number of us. There's 14 of us. I'm number 11. So
really,
yeah. So it was, How
was that growing? A lot of 14 siblings you meant, right?
Yeah.
Or 13 siblings of you. Well, how is that?
Well, they it's like most of us are a year apart, so it was kind of like, wow. And then I have brothers who are 10 months apart, so it was all about that growing up, was reproducing. And so but I was number 11. I was the oldest of the little boys, so I had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister who I was responsible for. And that's how the hierarchy was. It was big boys, little boys. My youngest sister, there was a big gap between her and my older sisters, but my big sisters are still my big sisters. And but they had to break it down like that because we're so big and assign responsibilities like that. So if there was a chore that needed to be done, it was a big boy chore. My dad might see me and say, hey, go get one of the big boys to come and do this. Or if it's a little boy chore, hey, go get one of the little boys. He didn't call us by name because, or he would say to me, hey, go get one of the big boys. So I'd go to one of my brothers and say, hey, Dad wants you to come. And they say, hey, am I the first one you said something to? Why don't you go out there? I said, no, you need to go, because I would get in trouble. At a certain point, Dad's expecting somebody to show up, and he sent me to tell them. So, it was that kind of how they managed. I think that was the more of how you manage having so many kids. There was a lot of rules and systems in place, and they were effective. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know you had that many siblings.
Yeah, most people, because when my time after later on we could talk about it, but my time in Hamilton with God's Way and all that stuff. Well, I just kind of came out of the blue, so they didn't really know a whole lot about me. They just kind of knew, well, he can sing and he's going to be, we're going to be in this group. So then later on when they found out, they were kind of like, whoa, So yeah.
Wow. So you talked about like the community atmosphere, and just to touch on that a second.
Okay.
How do you view like the major difference from then to like now? Because I would assume, I've heard stories before of like, if you were seen doing something by the neighbor down the street, like you kind of mentioned, they would correct you, like your parent may correct you. But you wouldn't really see that now, or it would turn into something really big now. What's kind of your thoughts on how that is?
Yeah, I can. As you were saying that, I was thinking about an example because they had permission to discipline you, like whoop you behind if you were doing something. But I'll give you an example. We played basketball all the time, and on our side of the community, we couldn't keep strings because they was always burning. we was playing all the time. But on the other side of the community, on the white side of the community, they didn't use their courts. So we had burned our strings down, and me and my brother next to me, Daryl, I said, well, they don't use the strings over at the athletic field. Let's go over there and get those nets. So we go over there, and I hoist him up, and he gets the strings and that. Well, meantime, that was my summer job. I was a swimmer, so I had water safety. I was going through water safety instruction, and I was a lifeguard. And the guy, Mr. Straub, who ran the park, he lived right there on the edge of the park. And so we're getting this, and he sat in his chair. I go over to his house all the time after work and just hang out. His wife would fix food for me. She bossed him around and stuff. She was a little lady. She bossed him around, and he sit in his chair and read the newspaper and stuff, but he could see right over where the park was. So he saw me hoist Daryl up. We got the nets, and we got home. It was time for dinner, and we're sitting getting ready to eat, and my dad says, "Hey, son," he says, "I got a call from Mr. Straub, and he said he saw two of my boys taking the strings off of the court over at the athletic field." And I said, "No, those wasn't my boys, because they know better than that." So he's looking at us. We had lost our appetite at this point. So then he just says, "When you're done, I want you to go over, get those strings, take them back over there, and put them back up." So we thought about running away, because we knew, like, stealing, that was a big thing. But we knew that we had a bunch of older brothers who would have to come and get us, and they literally have to carry us. So we went and we came back. He said, "When you get home, I got something for you." So we got disciplined. But the next morning, I ride to the pool with Mr. Straub. So I go over to his house, and I get in the car, and we're riding, and I said, "Man, Mr. Straub," I said, "I can't believe that you ratted me out to my dad like that. I thought we were friends." And he said, he looked at me, he said, "Son," he said, "I've been friends with your dad a lot longer than I've been friends with you." All he did was pick up the phone, because he could have opened the door and hollered at us, said, "Hey, boys," or whatever. He just picked up the phone, called my dad, and said, and so that's how it was. You know, you didn't know who was watching you, but he had permission to come out there with a belt if necessary and wail on us if that's what he felt like he was doing. And right. Yeah, so I think there was something about that. Some people might see it a certain way. I see it as community, that we had a solid community, and black and white. Mr. Straub was white, so he didn't, nobody had skin in the game. They just did what they felt they were led to do, or what my dad would expect them to do. Right. So yeah.
Okay. So before getting a little more into Glendale, things like that.
Okay.
We had talked a little bit, but Bill Parrish, but a lot of people call you Kasi. That's how I met you when I first met. That was your name. So how did that name come about? Is there a meaning behind it?
Yeah, it is. But your generation, this is probably beyond my generation, that would know. When I was a kid, with all of us having to be potty trained, my mom said that this show come on TV. It was called Cosmo Topper, and Topper was a ghost, and so it was played by Charles Nelson Riley. And my mom said that whenever that show came on, she would set the potty there, because she knew I would run and sit on the on the potty, and that's how I got potty trained. And so they started. Our family realized, the show is on, and so they started calling me Cosmo. That's when I, because of that show. And then it just broke off into Kasi. Or now my younger brothers, we all have nicknames. Like I have a brother under me, he's called Lumpy, and then Pie, or Pie Face. And so Lumpy got his name because he had got a little lump on the top of his head, and Pie, basically that he would get stuff on his face when he ate and all of that. But funny thing with Pie, and we were just talking about this the other day, when he went to school in kindergarten, they asked him what his name is for his name, and he said Pie. And his teacher said, "Well, what's your last name?" He said, "Face." So these names were so ingrained in us that my teachers called me Kasi. That's all they called me, except my 5th grade teacher. When they were doing the roll at the beginning of the class, they always, you raise your hand when the new year starts until a teacher knows everybody's name. So she said my name, my formal name, William. And before I could raise my hand, all of the people in the class, they said, "That's Kasi." And she looked at me, she said, "You'll be William in this class." And she's the only teacher that called me William. She's the only teacher out of all the teachers and everybody in the school.
What was that teacher's name?
Miss Crosby.
Miss Crosby.
I got a story about her too when we get into the Underground Railroad piece of this.
So, in the elementary, you went to Glendale Elementary, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading some stuff about, I guess, some impactful teachers you might have had, and teachers, maybe a kindergarten or 1st grade teacher.
Yeah.
Mrs. Lyle, maybe?
Yeah,
Okay.
Miss
Can you
Lyle.
talk about her a little bit?
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. You found Miss Lyle. Miss Lyle was my first crush. Like, I was in love. Me and my friend Shane, my best friend Shane, we were in love with Miss Lyle. And people in my class, even now that I'm good friends with, even the people that grew up, and they said that I was Miss Lyle's pet, and she treated me better than everybody else and all that stuff, which I was hopeful anyway that was the case, because I didn't really care. I mean, she was a great teacher. She was really inspiring. She was tough. But interesting thing about that, at the end of the year, we didn't want the year to end. And so me and Shane, we was crying at the end of the year. We didn't want to. So she comforted us, "Well, you'll be okay. You're going into 3rd grade next year. You'll be all right," and stuff. So when next year came, in 3rd grade, we were still feeling that. So what we would do is we would write letters. Like with recess, she'd go out recess with the kids and stuff. We write a letter and stuff, and then we put at the end of it, "I love you," and we would put it on her desk. That was just our way of saying we were not being able to move on. But yeah, it was, we had those kinds of relationships, that teachers that impacted you in a way. Like, you remember when I really started reading and how I got turned me on to the Putnam series books, and I started reading those, and I just started reading the whole series, just little things like that, and my reading comprehension and all that. And I wasn't playing it a whole lot. I'd be reading a book somewhere, and when you got called for dinner, sometimes you didn't want to break away from that book because it was so exciting. So she was probably one of the key early teachers in my life that got me hooked on reading. Okay. Yeah.
And maybe a math teacher, Mr. Barrett?
Mr. Barrett, yeah. Okay. Mr. Barrett, it's all sometimes really simple, Brandon. Sometimes like how you motivate a kid and stuff. And Mr. Barrett, the first day of school, I was good in math, but I knew I could be better. And you need somebody sometimes to motivate you. And so the first day of class, Mr. Barrett said, "Okay, everybody in this class has an A." I mean, just that right there, where other teachers may say, "Hey, this is going to be a tough class, and some of y'all are not going to make," that kind of attitude. Mr. Barrett said, "Hey, everybody's got an A." And he wasn't really trying to fail you. He was trying to make you better. And everybody, even people who struggle with math, it came easy to me, but people who struggle with it did well in his class. And that gave them confidence going on because you had a good teacher. He was more interested in not just having a reputation for people doing well and feeling confident when they left out of his class to go to a next level of math. So yeah, he was one of my favorites. Yeah.
And how did you and Shane meet?
Shane lived around the corner from me. He was from a big family, and pretty big family. I think it was 8 of them. And Shane and I were just best friends. I mean, we all played. You know how it is. You got your block of people that you play with, you do everything with. The problem in our neighborhood was that when we were on punishment or something, then it shut down all the sports because you got, when we weren't able to come out, then you couldn't put together, a good team of people when we were on punishment. So, but Shane and I, we were in second grade, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade together, and in fourth grade we were in separate classes, but in fifth grade. So we went through elementary school being in the same class. There were 3 classes for each grade level, but it seemed like every year Shane and I were in the same class. So yeah, he was my best friend then.
Do you still talk to him now, or?
No, he's had some challenges, physically and some of that. A few years ago, we talked when he was at a better place in that, but right now he's struggling with some things. So yeah.
Okay. Well, so before we get into like high school, I want to go back a little bit and just kind of talk about the history of Glendale, with kind of what you kind of touched on just a tad bit, like the Underground Railroad and stuff like that. Where Glendale played in that situation.
Yeah, this is growing up in Glendale, you could tell that it was a very fluent neighborhood, and growing up even from the standpoint of, where we were, we lived off of a garden, and, everybody had gardens and all that, and we lived on the black side of the village. So in a lot of cases, people don't even know that there was a black community in Glendale. So that people would always be surprised for you to hear you say, like, well, I live in Glendale, and they're like, well, you don't live in Glendale, no black people in Glendale. But it was that way then. But one of the things about it, one of the things I was very sensitive to, even as a kid in first, second grade, was that we were in groups, and there were 3 groups. And there was group number 1, group 2, and group 3. Group 1 was the rich white kids. Maybe 1 black person in there, maybe 2. And group 2, I was in group 2. There was a bunch of us in group 2, and then group 3 was really the group that was not quite, what they felt academically to be in group 2. So if you were in group 3, you pretty much stayed in group 3, and each of us came in a group, unless you were doing so outstanding that they might move you. But really it was designed by social strata in many cases, unless you were really, if you were wealthy and you were really struggling, then you would be in group 2 or 3. But that's the way things were then. And I was aware of that. Maybe a lot of kids weren't, but I was. But in elementary school, I was an outstanding athlete. So that was a thing that really kind of, as it is still now, puts you over the top. Like, it was all about the kickball games, or it was all about trying to get the presidential physical fitness awards and stuff. And I would get those because I was probably one of the best athletes in that. And even elementary school, I played in 4th grade. I was on the 6th grade team. So the coach, Mr. Wilson, he was a great coach. He was, we were using the medicine ball and stuff. He had these techniques and stuff that he was using for us to train and all of that stuff. And but in a school like that, many times it's there is the social strata part of that, and as kids you're not really paying as much attention to that because you just, my friends were black and white. I knew what was going on, but it didn't bother me as much because my friends were my friends and they were black and white, but it did exist. So I think then in 6th grade, one of my best friends, he was being socialized before going to 7th grade. 7th grade is a big deal for being socialized. So you're going to Lot Speech, or you're going to Summit Country Day, or you're going to one of those schools that traditionally, you know, in your family, you got a history of those schools. So one of my friends, he was going there. We were best friends, and his dad said if I went, he would pay my way, that he would pay my way to go to Summit. And so my dad was saying, I said, well, I don't think I want to go. I said, so I told him, I said, man, I said, all my friends are going to Princeton, man. The other people are going to Princeton, and I'll be the only black guy at this school. And I was like, But I said, we can work on continue to being friends, but I think I'm going to go on to Princeton. So that's how I ended up ultimately going on to junior high school, and that. But I had an opportunity to go to a more private school if I had wanted to, but socially, I already knew, like, man, this is not going to happen. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So going into high school, you said you still involved in sports at that time?
Yeah, I was still involved in sports. I really enjoyed it. In 7th grade, you know, that's when everybody came together from the other schools. So we had already played against schools like Sharonville, and then we had it. We didn't like them. You know, we would. Those are games that you wanted to win, and we won most of them. If we lost a game, then, you know, it was heartbreaking. I mean, you would actually just cry because it was that, you know, you didn't want to lose that bad. But now you come to junior high, now here comes the best of those, you know, and now you're playing together. So in 7th grade, we had a Coach Maupin. He was from Kentucky. We loved Coach Maupin. He was a bad dude. He was a baller. He was good, but he loved us. And I used to get out of class sometimes just to go in his office, like get a pass to go to the restroom, go to his office just to hang out with him. And then he used to hit us in the chest. You know, I mean, that was his thing, hit you in the chest. And that was, you know, you like that. You just come to get a hit. You know how that goes as an athlete sometimes. You just come in because he's like the dad that outside of your dad, you know, and you love him, and he was really good. But after 7th grade, I kind of felt like, I just fell into real politics of things and stuff, and it was, I wasn't really gelling with it that good. I played in 8th grade, and then 9th grade, I was playing basketball, and I was probably, my basketball game, I think I probably could have done whatever I wanted to do with it, but I had other interests and stuff. I played baseball and stuff. I didn't play football, but I had other interests, music, art, and all that sort of thing. So I didn't want to deal with the politics of how things were going. Then we merged with Lincoln Heights. So when Lincoln Heights came, it kind of changed the dynamic of, you know, they started having multiple teams, and then, you know, I think I just kind of lost interest. In my sophomore year, I just decided I'm not gonna go ahead and continue with this. I played baseball, and then, but at that point, I sort of given up on the idea that, even thinking that I was going to go, you know, play sports on the next level or anything. It just became recreational, and I enjoyed that. And but I went on and started to pursue art and music, and ultimately that's where I got the scholarship to college, was for that. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going next.
Okay.
You went to the Art Academy of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And you got a scholarship, you said. So how did that come about?
Well, it came about, I was just thinking that I was going to, I wanted to do art and music. I wanted to pursue art and music as a career, and it was too much to do. I had submitted my tape and all this stuff, and for auditioned and all these sort of things. But then I realized that, you know, art was the thing that I could pursue and I could see myself making a living doing, even though music was really strong. in my life. So I went ahead and applied to the school, Art Academy, and got the full scholarship, just based on my work and that, and it was really good. Now, part of this story, I mean, it's too big of a story to try to unpack all of it. I mean, you'd have multiple segments for days to kind of really share with you my life story, like for real, because it can be a little overwhelming. So I'm hoping that to try to tell the story in a way that it doesn't become confusing to people who understand part of it and not understand the other parts of it. But at that point, I was when I was in school, and Glendale, I had met her. I was probably 19 at the time I met her. I just got out of high school and met her. She came to Glendale to play for Mount Zion Baptist Church in Glendale. And so I met her and I fell in love with her. and it was a big deal because, one, my family, my parents mainly, and then people in the community, and I was good friends with the pastor of the church. I would spend a lot of time in his house and all this stuff, so they had these ideas about me and all this sort of stuff, but I fell in love with her, and it was real. I mean, and she got pregnant, and that's Devin. And so she gets pregnant, and that's a really big deal because the church and people, we weren't married, all that stuff, and it was just a big deal. And then she's older than me and all of that. So I get to the point where it's like, when she told me she was pregnant, I was like, man, that's great. She was like, no, it's not. She said, but I said, yeah, it is. I told her, I said, it is. I said, I love you. And I said, I'm going to be here for it. Well, I didn't know at that time, and that's why now I feel so empowered in my own life, because, you go through a lot of stuff when you're younger. It prepares you for later in life. You may not understand it and stuff, but I told her I was committed to her, but then I didn't see the wrath of all these people who said they love me. Now suddenly they have this problem. It's like, I'm just in love. Like, can't y'all accept that? And so I was there for her, but we had to leave Glendale because it was just so much. And so that's when I came to Hamilton, and that's when I met Annelle, your grandmother, and Anna and them, and and we became God's Way and started singing together, and that sort of became the thing that was somewhat my salvation, to have this relationship and then have this group that were amazing group to be in. I was the only guy, so we did prisons. I mean, we did a lot of ministry. I look back on that, I say, man, this was incredible. But then Devin was born, so everybody was like, oh man, and it was saying, well, whose baby is that? How a community does and all that stuff. But then when Devin came, I was there. I told her, I said, I'm gonna be here through all this, and I almost had a nervous breakdown behind it because there was a lot of pressure coming from everywhere, and I'm just 19. I'm just out of high school, and not knowing all this was gonna go through all this. And so when Devin was born, the day she was born, I never forget it, because it was a bunch of people at the hospital because they wanted to see her. It was like the birth of Christ or something. So they're all there crowded around and everything. And so I just walked on away with my brother Daryl under me, and we went. He had a couple Black and Miles, and we went and smoked those while we was waiting for her to, for the nurse to say, okay, you can see your baby now. So I came and I saw her, I was like, oh man, that's our child. And my whole life changed.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure it's like when you saw your first child or any of that, it was like, it's not about me anymore. And then suddenly, and you're just overwhelmed. And now you have to begin to live that out. So I told her, I said, I love you, I'm gonna be here. And so in Hamilton, as tough as Hamilton was, and as well as they knew her, we walked it out, like right in the face of people, and that was the time. It wasn't really hard for me, or it wasn't really hard for her, because like if you love somebody, it ain't, and you really know that, a lot of stuff doesn't matter. But it does when you have to deal with people who don't understand or don't respect it or any of that sort of stuff. So I think everybody's kind of blown away about it as Devin was starting to grow up and all of that, and they couldn't kind of put together that she was older than me and she had 3 kids, and here I am. I have a great relationship with them, but I wasn't trying to be their dad or anything. But I taught Kenny to play basketball because he was weak. He was, he was frail. As I built him up, he became a good ball player and stuff. And and then I played a lot in Hamilton at the center. So Glendale and I moved up there because we had to get away. It was about to break me down, and we lived with Lena in the projects over there on Welliver. 816 Welliver. It's over there, and we were just in there in survival mode, man, because we had been cast out from the community, and Lena said, you'll come and stay with me, and then so that's where it went from there. And I just with God's way, and then we started singing a lot and got some spiritual strength from that. And now and them, they were like my sisters. They still are, man. I still feel, even though I don't see them much or talk a lot, we don't get to talk as much. We grew really, really close during those times and that. So, yeah.
Okay. And are you still in school at this time? Are you still going through the art academy at 19 when Devin is born and stuff? Or
yeah, I can. That's the next part of this story.
Okay. And what was the age difference between you and Miss Glady?
21 years.
21 years.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. See, I didn't even realize it was that.
Yeah. Well, I'd say 20 years. I think it was maybe 20, 21 years.
Uh-huh.
And but here's the interesting thing about that is that you fall in love with somebody, and then people are more concerned with, well, this is going to happen or that's going to happen, and this and this. Well, anything can happen. You don't know how long something's going to last, but if you're in it, you're in it for as long. And so I never really thought about it that way. Like, I never thought about love like, I'm going to fall in love with somebody my age, or I didn't view it that way. So when I fell in love with her, I knew that this was real. I was like, and the only thing I really wanted to know was how she felt about me. But other people saw it like, well, she's taking advantage of a young man and this and that. And I'm like, okay. So when she got pregnant, she wasn't really expecting to get pregnant. But when she did, I think that was really in both of our minds, like, okay, what are we going to do? And so she was saying to me, I was like, what do you mean, what are we going to do? Like, I'm here. Like, I'm not going anywhere. That's my child. I'm going to be here. I'll do the work. I'm going to put in the work. And I had a car at the time. I had to get rid of my car, get the money. Was working part-time at a bank and, put my little money together. And she was working at Ford Motor Company, I think, at the time. And so, but it all kind of, we struggled through to provide sort of this foundation for Devin, and then at the same time her 3 kids, building a relationship with them. And over the years I really built a great relationship with them where they came to respect me for just how that's just me. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I wasn't trying to be that just was who I am. So I didn't have to try to change. And then she let me, I think one of the biggest things like I really appreciate about our relationship was like, I was the man. Like, she was wiser, much wiser, more knew God more. I grew from her faith and everything. But she didn't try to like run things, or dominate. And she let me be man. She let me do things. So I struggled through 5 years at the Art Academy, and I finally got my degree in '84. And I had a senior show, and I invited a whole bunch of people to the show, agencies and stuff like that. And so one of the guys who came to the show, he came up and gave me a card. He was from Scripps Howard. And he introduced himself. Hey, I'm Randy Cochran. I'm over Scripps Howard newspapers, and he was talking to me about it. So I'm looking around because our class was known for pranks on each other and stuff. So I'm like, somebody set me up, and I'm trying to see who it is and stuff. And but he gave me the card, and he says, hey, we got, he says, I love your work. He said, we can use you, one of our newspapers in Albuquerque, Denver, Hollywood, Florida, El Paso. He just named some newspapers and stuff. So he said, give me a call tomorrow. We'll set up lunch and talk to you, see how you feel about this. And so I did. I had lunch with him, and next thing I knew, I was on a flight to Denver to interview with the Rocky Mountain News, which was the largest of the Scripps Howard newspapers in Denver. I mean, all of the papers all over the nation, but I'm just out of school, and I'm getting this opportunity. So this was a really breakthrough for me and my family for all this stuff that we had gone through. I felt like, man, this is the real, my faith in God really increased, knowing that we were at the end of that part of our lives, and now we're in Denver. It was a huge opportunity for me to work professionally right off the top, because I wasn't expecting, because our teachers and instructors had told us, like, hey, you be willing to empty garbage cans in the agency, to get in and to move up. And in my mind, I was like, oh, hell no, I've been too much. And I didn't expect that, but so that's where I landed. That's where my career started, as an illustrator and page designer, doing editorial illustrations. My full page, like, it was over 500,000 people who saw the newspaper there every day. And at that time, I was illustrating feature stories and stuff, so my work was being seen everywhere. And so people in my family, they didn't really know what I did. They don't, like, a lot of people don't know what you do or any of that. And I never really cared about that, but I started sending them tear sheets of, here's what I do. And they were like, whoa, man, you're doing this out there? And it's like, God, it was a real, so that's how my career started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long did you spend out in Denver?
I spent 3 years out there, and then the Cincinnati Enquirer, where I couldn't get a job, they wouldn't hire me out of school. They came calling, and I had a chance to go to the Boston Globe. They flew me out there and that, but I didn't like the atmosphere. It wasn't. I mean, the newspaper business is pretty ruthless, but at that time I was the only black. So on top of that, there was this resistant attitude, like he got in through the back door sort of way, affirmative action or all that sort of stuff. But they soon saw, like, I started winning Society and Newspaper Awards and stuff, and and then they saw, like, oh, this guy's for real. But by the time they realized that, the Enquirer had called, and I got the art director's job in the Enquirer, so I came back to Cincinnati for a time to do that. And my career just took off. It was just, I got some notoriety, and it just was a real breakthrough for hard work and perseverance, and then life. Like, people, they have no idea. I had a great life. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I was you're going through just growing as a man and just trying to take care of your business and handle just basically like that, and then trying to overcome for people to see, like, hey, I'm I'm living this out. And so my career really jumped off, and I could pretty much go wherever I wanted to go at that time. But I liked the work that I was doing, and just glad that I was doing something that I was passionate about doing. Like, because I'm not the type of person who can just keep working a job that don't feel like I'm really being invested in, or I'm using gifts that I have for that. Yeah.
So I read that you spent time in Chicago, Michigan. Well, where else did you? Were you doing jobs up there, working up there, and where else did you?
Yeah. What happened was in 1999, I had this sort of epiphany about ministry, and I was at the point in my career where I felt like I wasn't feeling like this was what I was supposed to do the rest of my life. So I kind of, just say, okay, God, what is, I think there's another level for me of something that I think you have for me to do. And so I met Steve Sjogren, who was a pastor at the Vineyard Church in Springdale over here. And I met Steve, and Steve said, hey, he said, our church is transitioning, man. It's growing. I mean, they're growing by like 1,500 people in a year. And he said, I know, with your work as a communicator, communications, and communication design, and all that, he said, I need you to come and help us. And so I was like, Steve, I've been the only black in all these places. I don't want to be the only black person again, So I said, so why don't we just let me do some stuff on the side, work with you, and then see if I can fit into this thing that you all have going on. And so I did. I guess kind of did some contract work, and then they hired me full time as a communications director. And so in that role, it's sometimes hard to explain because sometimes people don't really understand how things work and how branding and how leveraging resources and ministries and all that sort of stuff, and then trying to bring it all into a single identity. Well, I did all that, and it brought the organization closer. But I got to a point after 2 years, I went to a huge conference. It was a mega church conference, and at that time the Vineyard Church was about 9,000 people. I'm still the only black person on the staff there. Dorian Hensey came shortly after that. But so I'm at this conference, and in Lexington at Southeast Christian Church, which was a huge, huge church, and there was pastors from all over the country who were there. And so I go down to this conference, and the guy who was leading the conference says, hey, at the conference was over, he said, take your name tag, and on the back of it, I want you to write 3 things that you want the other person to pray for you about, and then exchange it with them. So I exchanged it with the guy that I was with. I didn't know exactly who he was, other his name was Randy Pope. That's all I knew. So I gave him his, he gave me his. And so my quiet time in the morning when I got in my office, I would always just spend some quiet time just preparing for my day. But this morning I took out and I looked at it, and he said, the first thing said, we need a strategic director to help us get to the next level of ministry. And I said, that's me. So I called him. I said, hey, Randy. I said, hey, man, I said, I got your, I was praying about your thing, and I said, the first thing on it, and that's the first thing you asked. And I said, that's me. And he says, well, we got to get you down here then. So, and so they flew me down for a week. I was in Atlanta in Duluth at Perimeter Church, called this weekend intensive and all of this sort of stuff. And then they offered me and I went to Atlanta. so it's just been a series of things like this. Like these are what I would call like God coincidences that, the application process is there's people know that you're called and they commit, and then you do the formal stuff later. So I went to Perimeter, and it was huge church. I mean, it's huge, and really enjoyed that. But I knew that God was calling me to try to help churches become healthier in that. So I ended up going to Austin, Texas, for 3 years, to Edmond, Oklahoma, for 3 years, and then Holland for 3 years. It was almost kind of like 3 year stints, and then Chicago last for 2.5 years. And so it's almost like you're a traveling guy who comes to troubleshooter with churches to help them to. The problem with churches largely, and the reason why I was so relevant to the process, was that churches tend to not stay relevant to the culture they're trying to serve. So they're doing stuff and they're not listening to the community. And they're not, now, there's to a point where they're disconnected. Like they don't know the vibe of the community. We're still trying to do stuff that we did 20 years ago in a community that's not like, you can't go, you got to go and hang out with these people. Like you can't come, don't bring no Jesus words, don't bring no Bible, don't bring anything. Just hang out with people, meet them where they are, and then wait for them to share. But don't come saying we from the church. They don't need to hear that. So for me, I made that whole shift into getting off the church thing and then being immersed in the community. So I came back here, in God's sense of humor. There's a church in the West End down on Lynn Street off of, I have to laugh about this every time I talk about it because, I thought God was building this big thing for me, like, wow, 10,000 member church. Oh, wow, he was this at this church, and man, they had 12,000 people or whatever. And so then God brought me back to Cincinnati to church in the West End with about 50 people right on Lynn Street. I mean, where it's like the least of these. It's like where there's homeless community and all of this sort of stuff. And so I had to laugh because he was telling me that, well, all that preparation was for this. So I did that for the last maybe probably like 3 years. And before I decided I was putting things in place to do the Eckstein Cultural Arts Center during that time. But the journey has been amazing. I mean, it's been like, I've learned a lot about race and racism and, how, why it continues to have traction. And, but I also learned a lot about myself, like how I deal with it, and how I deal with it personally. And then I'm a solution-driven person. So I'm not really a person who I'm going to talk about problems. We got to talk about, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to address this? So that's where, sort of where I am now is because of my experiences of going to these churches where there's the biggest racism is in our churches. That's where it is. It's alive and well behind Jesus speaking people. So it's difficult to it's difficult when you hear people talking about it as something somebody says to you when you've been in a system where it's been perpetrated and you recognize it, and there's not much you can do about it. So now I feel like I'm at the point where in my career, because I'm retired now and I'm doing this art center, now it's like I feel I'm excited because now I feel like I'm really having impact. So all of that, I mean, sort of taking some leaps beyond some things to see that now everything that I've done in my life has really been for this moment, and I'm doing the things that now I think that are going to have impact on this, not just our communities, but the education, your kids that improve, because I'm all about education. I think we can debate or argue or whatever, but I'd rather give you something to read and then say, let's come back and have a conversation about it. But I think your kids are going to experience the opportunity to be agents of change in a lifestyle sort of a way, not sitting talking about race, but actually doing something about it, or them having real dialogue about it, and then seeing change happen right in front of their face.
Okay, so you did all that moving around, and you come back, and you finish up with the church on the West End, and you go into this Eckstein Cultural Arts Center. Tell us about what that is, and tell us about that.
Well, that's kind of complicated, and I can probably talk about it to a point because it's still going on. It's a real movement now, and but I came back. Actually, I came back to Cincinnati because I was going to do a mural for Princeton High School while I was in Holland. When I was in Michigan, the superintendent, I talked to the superintendent, and the school they had just finished the school. But the problem was that he and I had talked about it. I said, well, you guys have done all that, but you haven't done anything to leverage the past, of all these alumni who were part of this. Now you built this whole thing, and now you've torn down the old school, and you got alumni who don't connect anymore. So how do we, and so he got it. So he asked me, what do you suggest? So I said, well, he said, well, we got this 40-foot by 20-foot wall in Viking Village. Can you do a mural there? And so I was like, yeah. So he said, well, they'll drop some ideas. And then I came down on a weekend and showed him the ideas. It was called Past, Present, Future. And it was a mural that started like sort of with sepia tones. It's going to go full color, and then it's going to, on this side, it was going to be digital, sort of like the future. So they were all over it, man. So he said, well, look, we'll bring you down. Tell us what we need to do, and we want you here. So I told them. They got me this place where I could do all the work. It was like really big, nice place to do all the preliminary work and everything. So, and they were paying me during this whole time, 6 months in. I got the preliminary done. So now I have to go and present it to the board. The Board of Education they were finally seeing it. So I showed it to them, and so they said, well, everybody they applauded, but there were some people who wanted changes. They said, well, we'll change this and change that. And then they said, well, we don't like the fact that the Viking has a sword, give him a flag, and, things like that. So I'm thinking, that's why y'all getting beat by Lakota and stuff, because that's what I'm thinking. So I was like, the real Viking, y'all need the real Viking back. I don't know who this guy is. But, so, after they were making all these changes, I looked at my contract and I said, well, we're done with this. So I told them in the meeting, I said, well, they made all these changes. So I said, well, that's fine. I said, I can make all those changes, but we needed to write an addendum to the contract because that's done. I fulfilled that contract. So they said, well, no, you need to make these changes. You need to do this, 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 and this, and this. I said, whoa, you guys. I said, now, you guys just finished paying multi-million dollars to get a building fixed. Now, you decide you want to add some rooms on to the school after they're finished with the building. You're going to have to come back and pay the contractor. I said, now, you guys might see me as an artist. I'm not just an artist. I'm a businessman. I work through contracts. So here's what, you all want to make all these changes? I said, if you just want to lose these changes, I can go ahead and do this, make the changes while I'm doing the actual final draft. But they insisted. So pushed back and forth, and they didn't want to pay for the changes that they want to make. So the mural didn't happen. So and so people were pissed off. They were mad at me. They were this and that. I said, you guys are the ones who suffer from this. I said, think about it. Now, we're doing this mural, 20, 30, 40 by 20 foot mural in Viking Village. You come in there, that's the first thing you see. We're going to do limited prints of it, sell the prints for $50, $100 a shot. We were going to raise $150,000 just on prints to connect the alumni. This was geared towards the alumni who you all left out of this whole process and everything, but they couldn't see it because it got personal, you know. So it really hurt my feelings because I'm an alumni. Like I'm an alumni. Mr. Shands, who was a black man who was my art teacher, who was an incredible, he's a great athlete, you know, he was an architect, he was an artist, he was, Mr. Shands, I mean, he wanted to inspire me, like to know I can do this because of him and that. But I just said, I just shook my head, I said, I can't believe. But then again, I saw some things that made me realize that this is about race. You know, it is about that. And how do we address it? And so that's sort of what my mandate is now. It's really more about these discussions we're having about this. Now, the Eckstein school situation, I can only talk up to a point with that because it's still going on. But when I first came back, I saw the school in the community and it wasn't being used. And I said, man, I said, why is the school still sitting there? Black school where my parents and grandparents went, and it's just empty. So my brother said, well, I don't know what's going on. So I said, so I went down to the administration office. I said, ask them, why isn't the school being used? And they said, well, there was no vision for it. So I was like, really, is that it? They said, yeah. So I said, okay, well, I'll write a vision for it. And so when I said that, they said, well, whoa. Well, we got some rules for how we want to address that. So they gave me this whole list of rules of what I need to do to qualify for it. So over 4 years, 3.5 years, almost 4 years, I went through that process of doing that, did the history, did the background on it, got it pre-registered for the National Register, the National Park Service in Washington, and all of that. And I was supposed to get the building for $1. They didn't expect me to make it through the process. And so I did. And we got to the end of the process and they changed the game, right? We were negotiating the $1 deal. They flipped it over to a bid. I won the first bid, but then they said, okay, we're going to change it, the bid. We're not going to require all this stuff. It's just going to be money. So my board was frustrated, man. They was mad and stuff, and they couldn't understand why I wasn't so mad. And I said, guys, you got to stay to the end. You can't get frustrated and get off with it and lose sight of what it is you're really trying to do. So they finally got to the point where the next bid, I went ahead and bid, but the lady who bid on it, her and I were friends. She owned property in Glendale, and she was going to let me use one of her buildings in the transition of the 2 years it was going to take to renovate the building, turn it to an art center, multi-purpose building and stuff. So she said, well, I'll bid on it. And she said, if I get it, we'll partner. I said, okay. She said, you have the plan, I have no plan. So I said, okay. So she got the bid, and she called me the next day. We were supposed to have coffee, and she didn't show. And it wasn't like her, so I called her and I said, hey, what's going on? She said, well, I changed my mind. I don't think I'm gonna be able to go through with partnering with you. So I was like, okay. So I didn't know what was gonna happen. But then 2 months later, I hear this guy over the Rhine got the building. Over the Rhine, an architect, not a builder, not a person with money or any of that sort of stuff. And so, so he's had the building for 2 years, done nothing with it. The building, it's a wonderful building if you ever see it, if you ever drive through there. And he just, so in December I went to the council and I said, you guys, I said, this is really embarrassing. Plus Channel 9's doing a story, they're getting ready to do another story because this is so ridiculous that, but they've been covering it because they see what's really going on. So I said, well, so finally she says, I go to council and they say, well, I told him it's been 2 years and he's not done anything with it. So now they put pressure on him. He has to get it, he's putting it up for sale, and he's saying he's not having people bid on it. Meantime, there was one person in the village who had bid on it. She was black, and he ignored it. So now you'll see it. It's about to bubble up. August the 2nd, it's going to be on. You're going to see it on TV. It's going to be media. It's going to be a media thing because it's how racism is. The thing that I'm learning, there's the biggest part of this interview is that as a people, we got to wake up to the fact that there's a new narrative being written. Our stuff has been written off. All of not just the buildings and things like that are being torn down all over the city and all these places and everything, but all of our contributions. So that's why I wrote the book. That's why I did all this research, and that's why I continue to do it, because if that's going to happen, we still need to have a record that these things happened and they did exist. So I'm figuring the only way to do that, some of us got to keep writing. We got to document. We got to make this available. Go ahead and do what you're doing, but we're going to write it and we're going to be there and we're going to have it, and these kids can read about it, or whoever can, and we'll have a better understanding of what's going on. So it's but because of the position I'm in right now, I can't really talk a whole lot about that other than to say, stay tuned, because it's getting ready. It's getting ready when people get to see, okay, this is what happens when you have to stand up for something and the sacrifices that you have to make to stand for right, to stand for what's justice, and yeah.
Right. Yeah, I understand that for sure. Well, just to switch gears entirely, because we're running out of time.
Okay.
And this type of stuff, like you said, you got extensive story. That's why some of these things, have people back multiple times to talk about different things. But we know you're into sports and things like that. I'm sure you watched the finals game last night, maybe. What's your prediction for the rest of this series?
I think it's going to go 7.
Okay.
One, because of the state of basketball right now, I think that they needed to go 7, and it's got to be interesting. So, from what I can see, personally, I pull for Chris Paul, of course. I mean, the sort of the part of this where you want somebody to get something that they haven't gotten. But the other part of that, you see, okay, you're in the finals now. This is a chess match, and it's about making adjustments on each game. And so who makes the most adjustments? Home court advantage, that's probably 10 points that you get off the top of. But I see it's going to go back. It's going to go back and forth. Home, whoever finishes at home, I think it's going to be 7. I think it's going to be 7.
Phoenix and 7. That's what you got?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got Phoenix. That's my emotional choice.
Right.
And I'm usually not an emotional chooser of teams, but I'm choosing because I think I want to see Chris Paul get it. I think Giannis and them, they're going to be around. You know, they got other opportunities, but I want to see Chris get something because he ain't got that many more shots to take at it.
Yeah, he's on his way out.
Yeah.
In the next few years.
Yeah, so even if he go to L.A., like LeBron's talking about, you know, they shut that down for him when L.A. was trying to get him, and they nixed that deal, the opportunity for him to do that. But I don't think he can add another year or 2 years and then still be as effective as he could as he's starting to age. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I know it's a lot we didn't get to, a lot that I wanted to get to, but it's just a lot. You know, you got a lot.
Yeah, it's. But let me say this: that I think one of the biggest things about something like this is trying to. I think one of the things I'm faced with now is trying to help people to be comfortable with who they are and live it out. Like, just be you. Let everybody make adjustments. Let people make adjustments to what. And if they don't, then that means you got to do something. So you don't have to blame people for things that don't happen. I experienced a lot of blatant racism in my career, and blatant racism. And all I decide to do when I experienced it, I'd say, okay, well, I guess my time's up here. And then I'd start planning what my next move was going to be. And I think sometimes it can be just as simple as that. I think the fight, you can stand in and fight, but sometimes you just want to survive until you get to the next battle. And then I think that's how we help people, is by getting through and then being able to share the things that you've experienced, and then in a very practical way. So I can share with people, this is what racism looks like. This is what I experienced, but this is how I responded to racism. And that's the conversation I want to have. Like, I want to have that conversation more than the conversation we're having now, is to help people deal with race and share out of my experiences. I think people need that because we don't know how to deal with it when we experience it. And that's the problem for us, not for them. That's the problem for us because we're emotionally driven, and then our emotion drives us to do things that we do. But then there are things that you can do to, how do you navigate it? How do you learn from it? And how do you do certain things that help you to continue on your journey of growth and being better